I never thought the day I found out my grandmother loved me most would also be the day I lost everything I thought I knew about my family. I was in the middle of a deposition when my phone buzzed. I had silenced it before walking into the conference room. I always do, but it buzzed again immediately, which meant someone had called twice in under 30 seconds. That was the code my assistant and I had worked out for genuine emergencies. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway and looked at the screen. Unknown number. But the text that came through stopped me cold. Your grandmother's estate is being filed without you. Don't sign anything. Don't call anyone in your family. I'll explain everything. Please trust me. I stood there in the fluorescent hallway of Kellerman and Associates, where I had worked for 6 years as a forensic real estate appraiser, staring at a message from a number I didn't recognize, feeling the ground tilt slightly under my heels. My grandmother had passed away 11 days earlier. The funeral had been in Boise. I had flown back to Portland the morning after the burial because my sister told me the estate attorney would handle everything, and there was nothing left for me to do. She had said it so kindly. That was the thing I kept coming back to later. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I should tell you about my grandmother first, because none of what happened makes sense without her. Her name was Edith. She raised chickens in her backyard until she was 74, and refused to call them pets even though she named every single one. She made coffee so strong it left a ring on the mug, and she kept a spiral notebook on her kitchen counter where she wrote down things that struck her as true. Grocery lists, quotes from the radio. Once, when I was 9 years old and crying over something I can no longer remember, she sat next to me on her porch steps and said, "Crying is just your body trying to catch up to something your mind already knows." I wrote that down in my own notebook later. I still have it. She never had much money growing up. Her husband, my grandfather, died when my mother was still in college, and she spent the next 30 years working as a bookkeeper for a small construction company in Boise. She was meticulous. She saved everything. When the company was acquired by a larger firm in 2004, she received a modest severance and a small share of the buyout, more than anyone expected for a bookkeeper, because the owner had included her by name in the terms as a personal act of gratitude. She invested it quietly. She never talked about it. She drove the same Subaru for 18 years and bought her clothes at the end of season sales. I was the only one she talked to about it. Not because she was secretive, but because I was the only one who asked. Every summer I spent 2 weeks with her, and we would sit on that porch every evening, and I would ask her questions about money, about work, about how things added up over time, because even as a teenager I was wired that way. Numbers made sense to me. She taught me how to read a balance sheet before I understood algebra. She showed me her brokerage account once and then said, very carefully, "This doesn't leave this porch." I respected that. I never told anyone. By the time she died, at 81, she had built something real. Not generational wealth in the headline sense, but real. The kind of thing that could change a life if it went to the right person. She never had extravagant expenses. She still lived in the same house in Boise where my mother grew up. She still drove a Subaru, though it was a newer one by then. She also, it turned out, had a will, a very specific will. I didn't know the details of it, but whoever had sent me that text apparently did. I finished the deposition on autopilot. I am not proud of that. There were real people in that room whose property dispute deserved my full attention, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. When I got back to my office that evening and the building had mostly emptied out, I called the unknown number back. A woman answered on the second ring. She identified herself as the paralegal who had worked with my grandmother's estate attorney, not the attorney my family had hired after the death, but a different one. An attorney my grandmother had retained privately, in Boise, nearly 4 years ago. "Your grandmother came to us in 2022, she said. She had very specific instructions. She updated her will, created a separate trust document, and asked us to hold everything until 30 days after her passing before making contact. She wanted to give the family time to grieve. She also," the woman paused, "wanted to give them time to themselves, if that was going to happen." I sat with that for a moment. Reveal themselves. "What has my family filed?" I asked. The paralegal told me that my mother and my sister, who had been named co-executors of an earlier, much simpler will, had moved very quickly. Within 8 days of the death certificate being issued, they had engaged their own attorney and begun the probate process using the 2019 will, which named them as primary beneficiaries with a small, fixed bequest to me. A bequest so small it would have been insulting if it hadn't also been designed to make it look like I was included. They had not told me any of this was happening. They had told me to go home. There was nothing left for me to do. I hung up the phone and sat in my dark office for a long time. The Portland skyline was doing what it does in November, going gray at the edges, fog pressing in from the coast, and I remember thinking that my grandmother had known. Somehow she had known that if she died, they would move fast. She had set up a separate mechanism, with a separate attorney, to make sure I had a fighting chance. She had planned it like a bookkeeper, every line item accounted for. The paralegal had given me the estate attorney's contact information and told me to come to Boise as soon as I could. There were documents to sign. There were things I needed to know. She also said in this part, she said quietly, like she was choosing her words carefully, "Your grandmother left a letter for you. She asked that you read it before you speak to your family." I booked a flight for Thursday. I did not call my mother. I did not call my sister. I went home, made tea I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table reading through every text message my sister had sent me in the 11 days since the funeral, checking in, seeing how I was holding up, asking if I needed anything, telling me the estate was simple, really, nothing complicated, the attorney has it all under control. I had believed her. I had actually been grateful. I booked a rental car, a hotel room, and then I pulled up the Idaho Probate Court's online records portal and typed in my grandmother's name. The filing was already there 8 days after her death certificate. My mother and sister listed as co-executors. The 2019 will attached as the controlling document. I am a forensic appraiser. I work with legal documents, property records, and financial filings every day of my professional life. I know exactly how to read what I was looking at. What I was looking at was a move, a calculated, practiced move. I landed in Boise on a cold Thursday morning and went directly to the law office on Emerald Street. The attorney's name was Mr. Renfield, older, patient, the kind of man who puts a box of tissues on his desk not as an afterthought but as a considered professional courtesy. He had worked with my grandmother for 4 years. He spoke about her the way people speak about someone they genuinely admired. She was very clear about what she wanted, he said, folding his hands on the desk. She also told me, and I want to be transparent with you about this, that she had concerns about how the estate might be handled if she did not take additional steps. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a trust document, a revocable living trust that my grandmother had established in 2022, which had automatically become irrevocable upon her death. The trust named me as the primary beneficiary, not one of 3, not split equally with caveats, primary, the house in Boise, the brokerage accounts, a small piece of commercial property on the outskirts of town that I hadn't known existed. Everything that actually had value was in the trust. The 2019 will, the one my mother and sister had filed, only controlled the assets not covered by the trust, which, according to the trust documents, was almost nothing of significance. They had moved fast, gone to probate court, hired their own attorney, and spent 11 days managing me carefully, and they had been working with the wrong document the whole time. Mr. Renfield let me sit with that for a while. Then he said, "There's also a letter." He gave me privacy to read it. I sat alone in that office on Emerald Street with a single page in my grandmother's handwriting, tighter than it used to be, the letters slightly labored but unmistakably hers, and I read what she had written to me. She told me she loved me. She said she knew I didn't need to be told that, but she wanted to write it down anyway because she had learned that the things most worth saying are also the things people assume don't need to be said. She told me she had watched her estate closely in the years since my grandfather died. She had watched what happened to other families, friends' families, neighbors, when money appeared after a death. She had seen people who loved each other become people she didn't recognize. She had made decisions accordingly. She told me about the commercial property, which she had purchased quietly in 2017, and which had been leasing to a small medical supply distributor ever since. She described it practically like she was explaining a spreadsheet. $18,000 a year, net, reliable tenant, lease runs through 2028. And then, near the end of the letter, she wrote something that I have read so many times since that I have it memorized. "I know you will wonder why I didn't just tell you. The truth is, I didn't want you carrying it. I didn't want you to spend these last years watching the people you love and calculating. You have too good a heart for that. I wanted you to love them freely for as long as you could, and I wanted to make sure they couldn't take anything from you after I was gone. I'm sorry it worked out this way. I'm proud of every single thing you've become. I folded the letter and put it in my bag. I thanked Mr. Renfield. I walked out into the cold Boise air, and I stood on the sidewalk for a while and did not cry, which surprised me. I felt instead like something had settled, like a question I had been carrying my whole life without knowing it had just been answered. Then I drove to my mother's house. They didn't know I was coming. My mother opened the door in her robe, hair still damp from the shower, and her face moved through 3 expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, then warmth, then something she quickly put away that I can only describe as calculation. "Sweetheart," she said, "I didn't know you were in town." "I flew in this morning," I said. "Can I come in?" My sister was there too, which I half expected. She had always been the better executor of plans, prettier than me in the conventional sense, faster with a smile, better at the social mechanics of situations like this one. She hugged me at the door and said she was so glad I had come, that it was hard being here without Grandma, that she had been feeling the grief so much this week. I sat down at my grandmother's kitchen table. The spiral notebook was still on the counter. I noticed my mother had moved it to the edge, like she was planning to deal with it later. "I need to ask you something," I said. I kept my voice even. 6 years of depositions and expert witness testimony had given me a kind of professional calm that I was grateful for in that moment. "Can you tell me about the estate filing? A beat." My sister looked at my mother. My mother looked at her coffee cup. "The attorney has been handling it," my mother said. "It's mostly straightforward. Grandma's will is pretty simple." "Which will?" I asked. Another beat. Longer this time. "What do you mean, which will?" my sister said. Her voice was light. "Practiced. She had 2, I said. The 2019 one, which you filed with the court, and a trust document from 2022, which supersedes it for the majority of the estate's assets." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, someone's dog was barking in a neighboring yard. The coffee maker on the counter clicked and went silent. "I don't know what you're talking about," my mother said. "I think you do," I said. "I think you knew Grandma had assets beyond what the 2019 will covered, and I think you moved quickly after the death certificate because you were hoping to establish the probate filing before anyone raised questions." "That is a terrible thing to say," my sister said. Her voice had gone cold and precise. "We just lost our grandmother. We are grieving. And you are sitting here making accusations." "I'm not making accusations," I said. "I'm telling you what I know. Grandma retained a separate attorney in 2022. She established a trust. The trust is now irrevocable. The primary beneficiary is me. Mr. Renfield at the Emerald Street office has the documents." I watched my mother's face. I had appraised hundreds of properties in my career, and the skill that underpinned all of it was the ability to look at something honestly. Not to see what you hoped was there, but what was actually there. My mother's face in that moment was not the face of someone hearing unexpected news. It was the face of someone watching a plan fail. "She was confused in her last years," my mother said quietly. "She made decisions that weren't in line with what she would have wanted when she was fully herself. She was sharpest person I knew until the week she died," I said. "You know that. You've always known that. You don't have to be so cold about this," my sister said. "I'm not being cold," I said. "I'm being accurate. There's a difference." I stood up. I picked up my grandmother's spiral notebook from the edge of the counter and held it in my hands for a moment. Then I set it back down carefully, in the center of the counter where it had always been. "I'm not going to fight you," I said. "Mr. Renfield's office will be in touch with your attorney. The trust documents are valid, witnessed, and notarized. The probate filing you've made covers assets the trust doesn't include, which, as it turns out, is very little. You're welcome to proceed with it. I hope you do." I walked to the door. "You're going to destroy this family," my sister said behind me. I turned around one more time. I looked at both of them. My mother in her robe, my sister with her arms crossed, the two of them standing in the kitchen of the house where my grandmother had lived for 40 years. "She built something real," I said. "She did it quietly by herself over 30 years, and she made sure it got to someone who would respect it. That's not me destroying anything. That's her finishing what she started." I drove back to the hotel. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I called Mr. Renfield and told him to proceed. The legal process took 4 months, which is actually fast by Idaho estate standards because the trust documents were airtight. My grandmother had been thorough. She had initialed every page, had 2 witnesses present, had it notarized twice, once at the office and once at a bank, and had retained copies with a third party. Mr. Renfield had seen her every 6 months to review and confirm her wishes. There was no ambiguity. There was no avenue for contest. My mother and sister hired an attorney who sent 2 letters challenging the trust on the grounds of undue influence, the argument being that I had somehow manipulated my grandmother, the woman who had always known exactly what she wanted and written it down in spiral notebooks. Mr. Renfield responded both times with documentation. The challenges went nowhere. In February, the estate transferred, the brokerage accounts, the house in Boise, the commercial property on the outskirts of town with its reliable tenant and $18,000 a year in net lease income. I didn't sell the house right away. I flew back to Boise in March, when the snow was starting to thin out, and I spent a week there. I went through things carefully. I kept the spiral notebooks. There were 11 of them, going back decades. I sat on the porch every evening with coffee that I made too strong on purpose, and I looked out at the yard and the bare-limbed trees and the sky going orange at the edges. My mother called twice during that week. I let it go to voicemail. My sister texted once, a long message that moved through several emotions before arriving at a veiled threat about contesting the transfer. I forwarded it to Mr. Renfield and didn't respond. I am not without grief about it. I want to be honest about that. The version of my family I had believed in, the version where we were imperfect but fundamentally decent, where the difficulties were just the ordinary difficulties of people who love each other, that version did not survive the kitchen conversation in November. I grieve it sometimes the way you grieve a place you loved as a child and return to as an adult to find it has been changed into something else. The grief is real. It just doesn't change the facts. On my last evening in Boise, I found something tucked inside the final spiral notebook, a piece of paper folded in thirds, with my name written on the outside in my grandmother's handwriting. I hadn't seen it before. Maybe she had added it recently, or maybe I had simply missed it in the first pass through the house. It was short, 3 sentences. You always ask the right questions. That's the whole thing, really. Just keep asking. I sat with that for a long time on the porch, in the cold March air, with the coffee getting lukewarm in my hands. The commercial property had just renewed its lease, my grandmother's tenant opting for another 5-year term. The house in Boise had appraised well, better than I expected, given the neighborhood, though I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised. She had always maintained it meticulously. Everything she touched, she took care of. I thought about what she had built. 30 years of careful, quiet, unglamorous work, buying a piece of commercial real estate no one paid attention to, saving instead of spending, never asking to be recognized for it. She hadn't needed anyone to see what she was doing. She just needed someone who would know what to do with it when the time came. I locked the house and put the key in my bag and drove to the airport. I had a deposition on Monday. A property dispute in Lake Oswego, 2 neighbors, a surveying error, the kind of thing that sounds small until you realize how much it matters to the people living it. I would read every document carefully. I would tell the truth about what the numbers said. I would do the job right. That was the whole thing, really. Just keep asking.